Andromeda and the Merman. Andromeda and the Merman. This is categorized under social sciences and mental health on the Noom Vibe app and will be available on Spreaker and as well as all the other many places this gets broadcast through the Spreaker app. And the Andromeda and the Merman is a title of a story that's personal to me, in which I am attempting to figure out what is going on with my mental health. So, what I mean is that I'm stuck in this world where my life is very much focused on and driven by the desire to understand the basic laws of nature through science. At the same time, I have a very fantasy driven mind, that I also have a very vivid imagination, and I am very eager to fill in unknown areas with these fantasy stories that come to me. And also, there are some connections to other phenomena that people report in the world that this seems to be related to, and it gives me cause to wonder why. So, for example, this is about the metaphysical and global phenomena of people encountering what they claim to be non-human intelligences or extraterrestrials, or more commonly known as aliens. And Andromeda and the Merman is a very interesting one to me because it's one of the first encounters or experiences, as I will interchangeably call it as well, that I remember from a very young age. There were a few times when I was in kindergarten when we would be out on the recess area, the playground, which was closed off by a very tall chain link fence, and it had a chain link door. I'm sure you've seen those on the perimeter, as one of the exits and entrances to the playground. So now I'm in kindergarten, or at least in elementary school, but I remember very specifically kindergarten. And there were a couple of times when I ran away from school and went home. And at some point in time, I'll get into the details about why I would do that. And it was partially a concern for the well-being of my mother, but that's another story here. So the Andromeda and the Merman, it has some significance to this global phenomena that people talk about these non-human intelligences or extraterrestrials, or what most people commonly call aliens. And in my attempt to figure out what's going on, I've had to abandon simply accepting it as that's exactly what it is, and instead look to see if there is something about my mental health that's responsible for this, and understand a little bit better what's going on. So these reports will explore that. It's interesting, it's exciting. It could be looked at as science fiction or fantasy, psychology, mental health, social sciences. These are the ways that I'm exploring it. So back to the kindergarten and running away from home. So on one of these occasions, at least this is how I recall it, and I'm very aware that sometimes our memories, we make things up to fill in the blanks of what we don't understand and know. But as I recall the situation, I left the school. I snuck out of the gate. I actually did this a couple of times. and ran away to go home. On on the way, I ended up being, whether it's in my mind or not, whatever happened here, I ended up being in an enclosure very much like the enclosure, the outdoor enclosure that was surrounded by these very tall chain link fences. That was an empty space. And this is in New York City. And so it was a smooth, flat concrete basin with a surrounding concrete lip that probably went up maybe 2 or 3 feet high. And then the chain link fence came up out of that on four sides. And this particular one was a rectangular shape. And there was two, slightly off to my left, there was a woman with blonde hair and green eyes. And I remember thinking that she was beautiful and attractive, even as a young 5 year old something kid, 5 or 6 years old. And well, actually, it was more like five because I do remember I went into preschool at around 3 years old and I started kindergarten at four. So in in September I turned 5 years old, a little bit into the school year. And she was somewhat scantily clad. The way that I could best describe some of the things she was wearing is if you could imagine Wonder Woman. And I will freely admit that Wonder Woman was, in fact, one of my favorite TV shows. I was very attracted to Linda Carter as a kid. I watched Wonder Woman not only because she was a superhero, because I thought she was pretty. And and this reminded me of the kind of outfit that Wonder Woman would wear. And maybe I'm embellishing, but I feel like I remember she was wearing something like a gold tiara in her blonde hair, and she had these like gold spiral ringlets of some kind, these rings around her bicep, tricep area, and some bracelets or gauntlets. And the connections to this and some of the other folklore and things that people will say you'll hear in a moment. Here's the first one. This is where the title of this Andromeda and the Merman comes from, the Andromeda part. What happened was I thought that she was transmitting to me her name. And I'm very carefully using the word transmitting because she didn't speak it to me. What I would later learn from a lot of the so-called contactees in this whole UFO and extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence and alien lore is that different beings, for some reason, have the ability to speak to us telepathically. And so that was the first thing that I actually heard was, or got transmitted to me, was the name Andromeda. And I thought, at least, that this was her name. Of course, if any of you know anything a little bit about astrophysics, if you don't, I'll clue you in. But Andromeda is one of our nearest galactic neighbors. It's another galaxy, the Andromeda galaxy, which some astrophysicists say we're on a collision course with. In some couple of billion or trillion years, our two galaxies will gravitationally intertwine with each other. Which is interesting because we are on the outer spiral, one of the outer spirals of our Milky Way galaxy. So we're close to that, technically, closer than, for example, the inner part of our galaxy, the core of our galaxy, where lies a massive black hole. So she transmitted to me telepathically, according to the lore, the name Andromeda. And I thought it was her name as a child. I actually thought it was her name for maybe 20, 30 years until I learned, or whenever the first time I learned about the Andromeda Galaxy, but I still didn't put it together at the time. But right after she transmitted to me this name, Andromeda, no sooner did she say that than there was a very silent craft that was almost, but not completely like a typical UFO, like a flying saucer. It was a disc-shaped object that very silently came down into that courtyard area surrounded by the chain link fence. It was small enough. It was like a single passenger vehicle. It was very small. It was no bigger than, I don't know, something like a car and a small car. And it was somewhat dishy, but it looked like it was made out of emerald or even jade or something like green jade. It looked very, it had some very interesting contours and shapes, but inlaid in that jade or emerald material that the main part of the flying disc was made out of, it was lined with gold. It had gold uh, instruments or protection or whatever it was in the craft. It was ornamented with gold, like it was embedded. Imagine gold being embedded in jade rock or emerald stone. And it very silently landed and came down, and out of it came a creature that looked like a merman. And I specifically merman, like from the He-Man cartoons merman. It wasn't exactly like, it was more reptilian. And this is important in the extraterrestrial lore, which would then come to me later. But what happened to next was very shocking and disturbing to me because, one, she transmitted Andromeda to me, which I thought was her name. She, almost immediately after that, this very silent aerial vehicle landed without making any noise, and out comes this merman. And he immediately fires some kind of energy device, which hits her right between the breast, in her chest, and leaves a black burned hole there. And then I woke up in my bedroom at home. So think about this. I ran away from kindergarten, started running on my way home, encountered this Wonder Woman, blonde Wonder Woman with green eyes, who transmitted to me telepathically the name or the word Andromeda. I thought it was the name at the time. Right after that, she gets attacked by this merman with some kind of energy device that burns a hole in her chest, and then I wake up at home. So what am I talking about here? I'm attempting to reconcile what's going on with these experiences in my mental health and what they mean. Because either they're a real thing that's happening with real flesh and blood creatures and beings, or they are figments of my very vivid imagination, and there's just something very interesting about that, right? So now the next part of this is fast forward to about 2008, when sometime after, well, first in 2006, I graduated from the Hypnosis Motivation Institute. You can find them at hypnosis.edu. First nationally accredited college of hypnosis, so on and so forth. Really great school. They also teach some interesting metaphysical subjects. I, through a series of very interesting events, I decided to get this book called The Threat by David Jacobs, PhD, who taught history at Temple University. I then got into correspondence with him. He found out I was a hypnotist, and he gave me a program with which I could help people to uncover memories that may have been lost to them, but doing it in a way that does not lead them. Meaning, you don't ask a person even, were you wearing pants? You say, were you ask them the question, were you were you wearing clothes or not? And you don't lead anything else, right? You don't ask them about any colors or give any details. You allow the person to provide the information themselves. And it was around this time that I started looking after that, around 2008, when I started really studying books about this because of things that were happening that really were leading up to this. That I then learned a very interesting coincidence that's directly related to this Andromeda and the Merman experience. And it was that supposedly in the extraterrestrial alien non-human intelligence lore, there are two races among many that are fighting each other. And some of them are called the Lyrans or the Nordics, and the reptilians or reptoids. which was very interesting. When I saw that, immediately these memories rushed back to me that she must be one of these Nordic or Lyrans, right? Because that's why they call them Nordics, because they're blonde and they have blue or green eyes and things like that, and white skin. And then there's these reptilians, and that they've been fighting this war for a very long time with each other. So just imagine my surprise about that coincidence. It's something that made me think that there might be more to this. Again, I'm completely open to that. There's just something about my brain that does these things, because this is not the last of these experiences for me to have. Actually, there will be three more very significant ones that were encountered with flesh and blood creatures that I could see. There were many others that were encounters with physical encounters that I could not see. But again, who knows what these experiences are and what they actually mean? And there actually may be some explanations to them through neurology and physics that I've also been learning about that are fascinating as well. And I attempt to be as level-headed as possible now with this, especially amongst all the things that I'm learning. But it's fascinating. Why would my brain do this? And so that is the Andromeda and the Merman, right? I had this experience, and then there was a similar uh, something that I could relate it to later that had to do with the lore on aliens being these two types of races, these two different types of beings fighting each other. And then also just a coincidence that she telepathically gave me this name Andromeda, which I thought was her name, but it turns out it's the name of a galaxy. And also Andromeda um, is comes from a much older uh, from the lore. And there was actually a movie I think called the Andromeda Strain. So I don't know if that could be related, but Andromeda in Greek mythology is the daughter of King Cepheus and of Queen Cassiope of Joppa in Palestine, which is Ethiopia, and the wife of Perseus. So and so I just think that's interesting, and that we I would have that kind of thing, that experience. And now I'm looking on Google here, Andromeda. Let's see what this is about the Andromeda Galaxy. Let's see. Wow, they have coordinates for it. The brightest star is Alpheratz, Roman name Andromeda. Let's see. The Andromeda Galaxy is a bar. So this is what Wikipedia says. Andromeda Galaxy is a barred spiral galaxy and is the nearest major galaxy to the Milky Way. It was originally named the Andromeda Nebula and is cataloged as Messier 31, M31, and NGC 224. I won't go too much more into that, but that is my note on there. There are lots of very interesting things about that story. There are several more, including two encounters with what people commonly call the gray aliens. The first one was with some very short ones as an adult when I was wide awake. Again, who knows what my mind does in hallucinations. And another one was very recently in 2019, also very strange. This is with the taller ones. And in between that, around 9 years old, when I moved from Queens to the Bronx, there was also some interesting thing with these two insectoid things attempting to crawl into my window. So I'm going to continue to explore these interesting things, these experiences, and attempt to see what kind of connections I can find and what they mean for, as far as psychologically and mental health, and why my brain would make these things so surreal to me, and why there are these interesting connections. For example, why would I get a telepathic communication? So those are the coincidences, right? The lore that I would later learn is that from people when they have these contacts with so-called aliens is that they have these telepathic communications. And then there's the thing about the Andromeda Galaxy. And then there's the connection that these two different races that are described as the two, the the Nordics and the reptilians were fighting each other. So there's all that kind of stuff, right? That's just very fascinating. However, there may be some neurological, psychological reasons for that. There is a mentalist named Darren Brown who he set up a situation where he hired these advertising executives. Yeah, and what he did, he had them take them from the airport, and along the route, he had to his office, he had all these different visual stimulants placed carefully around them, like kids crossing the street wearing certain T-shirts and certain things placed in windows and on billboards and so on and so forth. Which was also, somebody told me when I had related this story to them, said that there was a Will Smith movie. I had actually seen it myself too. So basically, Darren Brown, what happened in the end was he asked them to draw what they thought would be good for his ad campaign, and all of their drawings were almost identical with very slightly different details, and of course, according to the artistic talent of the, ad, the advertising folks who were doing this. And they all came up with the same thing. So it's possible that things that I've seen in my periphery and things that I've heard, because of course Andromeda is a galaxy that we know of. There's the Merman and the Andromeda, the Lyran Nordic woman, kind of looking like Wonder Woman except with blonde hair, but not looking like her, just the kind of garb. That's the only way I could describe it as a child, and it still sticks with me. And the Merman thing too, from Merman from He-Man, and the telepathic thing. Why is that a thing as well? That, and why not speak to me? Why was it telepathically sent to me? So there's those coincidences, but then there's also the possibility that there are things in my environment that made all of those things come together in my mind. So then I finally had some strange hallucination about it, and that I don't remember also how I got home. So that, there's some interesting things worth exploring. And in the next ruminations about this, I'm going to see, as I put these stories together, what things I can figure out about it. So that's Andromeda and the Merman.